raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. I raise a hallelujah.
This afternoon. Please join me in welcoming Pastor Hannemann.
Thank you, Aaron. It's an absolute pleasure to be back here with the Christ family. As maybe some of you know, I was ordained at the Sumner campus, and I was actually married at that very same altar years before that. So Christ holds a really special place in my heart, and credit Pastor Schnocky, Pastor Scheich for a lot of my development in the ministry, and I'm very thankful for your system, and I'm pleased to be back here with you. A couple disclaimers. This is kind of like a survey of a 16-week graduate course. So I'm going to try to cram it all in an hour. No, I'm just kidding. We'll just hit some of the highlights. It's also, you're going to find that probably the majority of it is unpleasant. A lot of the data and information is not like smiley, happy face sort of stuff. And I've tried my best to make it not that, but I haven't been able to. I will end on a positive note. So if you can hold out for the end, I think you'll find some more positive stuff toward the end. So the title, Sex, Tech, and the Developing Mind, I'll get to in a second. This is the last time you'll hear me condone using your smartphone in this talk. If you want to learn more about Grace Point, feel free to use the QR code, and that'll take you to our website if you have any questions. And I'll put this up again at the end. Grace Point Institute for Relational Health. So you'll notice that the title is Relational Health, and it's not behavioral health, it's not mental health or psychological health or any of the other types of health that you hear. Grace Point is about relationships. It's about healthy relationships. And that's because 12 years ago when we started, we were trying to come up with the name. I couldn't distinguish, and still can't, between relational health and spiritual health. They are one and the same. Our relationship with God, made right because of His Son. Our relationship with ourselves, made right because of that relationship. And then that animating us for all the other relationships of life with God, self, primary others, and creation itself. And so at Grace Point, we're really trying to help people live with relational health in all of those domains. We have offices in Lincoln, Omaha, and last year we opened an office in Columbus. Here in Lincoln, we're on the campus of the University Lutheran Chapel, 15th and Q. Now I want to start with some risk factors. I told you it wouldn't be all smiley and happy. Okay, we're going to start with risk factors. And these risk factors, I'm not associating with anything in particular right now. I just want you to think about these risk factors. Depression, anxiety, disparate social comparison, body image dissatisfaction, sleep deprivation, ADHD symptoms, social anxiety, sexual exploitation and abuse, poor academic performance, addiction, and chronic loneliness. That's what we want for our children, right? And we definitely want things in their lives where these risk factors are associated with them, correct? So I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are all showing up on Sunday afternoon during nap time. Like, this is prime nap time. So I know I'm preaching to the choir. You're here on a Sunday afternoon because you care about your kids, and you wouldn't want anything in their lives with this list of risk factors. And this is the short list, right? What are we talking about? Well, what would we as parents, schools, and society do if we knew these risk factors were strongly correlated with a specific substance or habitual behavior, what would we do? Start throwing them out there. We'd get rid of them. We'd limit their use. What else? Take them away. Set strict boundaries around them. Would we do social things, like influence how our schools and policies about them? Okay? Would we talk at like maybe the state or federal level about legislation that would help take care of our kids? The truth is, I'm getting some feedback, Aaron. The truth is, there are several things that we've already done this with, right? How many of the schools in Nebraska are tobacco-free campuses? All of them. That is different from when I was a kid in Michigan, where my Lutheran school principal had a pipe lit the entire time. And like, he had to deal with me, so I understand why. But Mr. Staub had a pipe lit the whole time. So why don't we let tobacco around our children? Because of all the risk factors associated with proximity to it. I mean, it's kind of that simple. So what do you think I'm talking about? Cell phones, social media, pornography, in particular, the unregulated social media use in the lives of our children. That is the short list of documented risk factors. And we're not talking like, 1 in 100,000 has one of those symptoms. We're talking 10% minimum have at least 3 of those symptoms. And then we're looking like you could probably get into the 40%, like have at least one of those symptoms because of their proximity to it. So what would we do? We would legislate regulation, we'd educate temperance, and we'd restrict use in our home. But what do we actually do? You know what I did this spring? I spent $1,600 on an iPhone for my 16-year-old. How about you? Did you invite it into your home? I'm sure you did. Maybe there's restrictions placed on, and I'll talk to you about what we did with Kaiser to try to help with that. Okay? But number one is restrict use in our home. Also create awareness, which we're trying to do today, but that we need to do, I think, at the school board levels in particular, and others. We'll go through some of those details as we go. So when you pray for your children, what do you pray for? When you pray for your children, what do you pray for? Safety? Health? What? That they're kind. That they develop well across the domains, emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually. That they are developing well. Godly spouse. That they don't do something real stupid and hurt themselves real bad in one of those domains and arrest their development. That I don't do something really stupid in one of those domains to arrest their development. I know I've prayed that prayer. Okay? So I think it's the infiltration into society of a lot of things follows the same pattern as bankruptcy. How do you go bankrupt? The phrase is little by little by little by little, and then all at once. And I had a brick cell phone, I think in my late teens, and it kind of captured me. I could call my friends and whenever I wanted, and then a little bit later I could text them, in a really efficient way of pushing numbers multiple times and actual analog buttons, right? Okay? We want good things for our children, but things sneak in little by little over a long period of time, and then there's this cascading effect, and we're seeing the cascading effect, and I want to share some of that with you too as we go. But before, I want to give you a frame of mind about for parenting that I think is really, really helpful as we talk about what it's going to take to push back, okay? So who wants their children to be like teacups? They're cute. They hold tea. They're pretty. But why don't we want our children to be like teacups? Because you drop them and they break. We don't want our children to break that easy, right? Okay, that's obvious. How about like a Kong chew toy? I have a Kong chew toy in my backyard. The thing has been run over by multiple mowers. It's been chewed on by more than one dog. It's been lost for a year and then found. And it's still recognizable as a Kong chew toy. So it's very, very resilient. Can take a licking and keep on ticking, if you will. And I think we want an element of this for our children, right? We want them to be tough. We want them to be resilient. We want them to be able to take difficulty without falling apart, okay? So there's a lot of research on resilience, and I think it's good. And I think we really, really want our children to be resilient, right? Raise your hand if you want your children to be resilient. Me too. Okay? But I don't just want our children to be resilient. Why? What happened the second you took the Kong chew toy out of the package? It began to decay. It began to decay. So it's tough. But humans can be something even more than resilient, which I think is really, really helpful. And just as a disclaimer, all the educators in the room, don't throw anything at me, okay? They define resilient as the way I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk about next. Anti-fragile. Sean, thanks for letting me use your arm for this picture. I appreciate it. Okay. Anti-fragile. Okay, so like a human muscle fiber, what do we do with that? We stress it out. We work it out. We literally do damage to it. Why? Because if we give it what it needs after we do damage to it, if we give it what it needs, what happens? It comes back stronger than it was before the initial stress. That's what living organisms that God made can do. And we want that for our children, don't we? We want them to have a difficult conversation with a peer at school, come home a mess, have a meaningful conversation with a parent, and have more resources when they go back to school to deal with it. We want them to grow physically that way. What happens to a body that never gets stressed out? It doesn't grow. It doesn't develop. Got a football coach here, right? We know that you have to play physical if you want to get stronger. Literally, bone density. Your bones get more dense the more you stress them out. Up to what? There is this breaking point. Do we want that breaking point for our children on a regular basis? No, that demoralizes them. That doesn't work. But we definitely want their minds and their bodies and their spirits to become anti-fragile, which is to gain from stress. Now, I work with lots and lots of teenagers in my clinical office. I work with lots of adults too. And you can tell the people who are eager to use whatever challenge they're going through to get smarter, to get wiser, to get stronger, to get healthier. And then you can see the people who have never been taught that skill, and then the people who have reached that point where they really feel broken. Sadly, many of our teens in our society right now have been at that point. Now, I think that's partly because we aren't doing a great job teaching anti-fragility, that we're not teaching that kind of grit and resilience. two books that I think are really, really helpful that I'd turn your attention to on this topic. The Coddling of the American Mind came out before the pandemic. How many of you have heard of that book? Read it? Good. This one came out last month. The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. These two books taken together, I think, provide a lot of resources for parents. There's a whole communities set up for this, and I really think that these could be useful for you. So I just wanted to share what are our therapists seeing. We're seeing anxiety. So, I think Vanita, it was a couple years ago, I just kind of asked the therapist, what are you guys seeing in our teens? Because I was preparing for a youth and mental health post-pandemic presentation. And this is just kind of the stuff that has come back from the team of counselors at Grace Point. Anxiety. How many of you have heard that buzzword about our children you've heard it on podcasts, you've probably heard it on the radio, seen it on the talking heads on TV. Well, our therapists are seeing it too, and this is how they describe it: some cognitive symptoms. So one of the main ones is catastrophizing. This tendency to make these little molehills in life into mountains because they feel like mountains to people who aren't anti-fragile, to people who don't have resilience. This little molehill can feel like a mountain. ADHD symptoms, mental academic paralysis. I call it checking out. Any attempt to just get away, to not have to think. Now, I'm not just talking about teens on that one in particular. Netflix, binge watching Netflix, doom scrolling, Instagram or Twitter or whatever, X. This checking out is taking place. We're seeing emotional and spiritual symptoms. I just use this word despair because it captures a lot of different elements of despair. You can think of depression as just like this, like hatred turned inward, where deep resentment and frustration with not feeling good. But then it's really marked by even things that one would enjoy, they can't enjoy. We're seeing a lot of that. Dissociation. Now this is like the really profound dissociation where people have multiple personalities. We're not seeing that as much, but we are seeing the little mini dissociation where they don't want to be themselves. I was talking with a 14-year-old girl, and she would have this conversation with me, and as soon as we were getting to a difficult sort of place in the conversation, she would have this little mini dissociation and start talking like a little girl again. And I'm seeing a lot of that throwing of the personality into something a little bit different so they don't have to feel what they're feeling. Dissociation. Physical symptoms, digestion issues, skin issues, self-harm. And I want to distinguish self-harm from suicidal behavior. Self-harm can actually function more like an addiction than actual suicidal behavior, but self-harm, cutting, burning, hair pulling, things like that. Compulsive behaviors, eating, social media, academics, the sexual compulsivity, which we'll talk about in a second, and then substances. And the most common that I've been dealing with among youth and teens is very predictably THC, because it manages anxiety so well. Xers, boomers, what was it? Alcohol. Because they wanted to not be bored, they wanted to be excited, and because they felt understimulated. Latchkey kids, if you will. But younger millennials and Gen Z, they're overstimulated and have lots of anxiety, and so THC does pretty good job of managing that, sadly. It's bad medicine for it, though. Social symptoms, isolation. Okay, so I want you to think of the spectrum, and you'll see if somebody's not doing well, they'll pick their coping. On one end, isolation, withdrawal, avoidance, profound social anxiety, just movement away. And then on the other side, you'll see extreme preoccupation, meaning they're going to pull out their phone and they're going to check 100 times whether or not somebody saw their post. They're going to check 1,000 times whether or not they're on the right Snapchat thread, whether somebody replied to their invitation to some digital playground. So we'll see this spectrum of isolation and preoccupation. Now I will tell you, and that leads to the FOMO. But the one that I want to highlight that I think is most damaging socially, and the one that's most damaging to the church and to society, is the lack of mind sight. The lack of mind sight. Human beings were created with this amazing capacity, especially in maturity, as we gain maturity, to hold somebody else's mind in your own mind, at the same time have your needs, wants, desires, fears, be able to hold those two at the same time in tension, set yours aside for a second, and care for somebody else, even if it costs you something. Who did that for us? Jesus. Okay? So what is this fundamental call that we have? Is this ability to have compassion, to see what's going on for somebody else, to care about it, and even practice at times self-denial in the care of someone else. If I were going to say the one thing that I'm most worried about is the mechanisms of formation socially over the last decade, in particular, decade and 12, 14 years, are so disembodied that a large chunk of the humans on the planet under the age of 20 are not being challenged to think, see, feel, perceive the inner world of someone else in the flesh, which is absolutely critical for love, for belonging, for intimacy and closeness. This is what I would say scares me the most. So then where does sex fit into that conversation? Well, it is the pinnacle of and the adult instantiation of that emotional connection, that intimate connection. It is the place that God calls us to for that. And what are marriages struggling with? Not seeing each other, not knowing each other, not understanding each other. Okay? So this lack of mindsight is the thing that I'm most concerned about. I want to pause right there. Aaron, you have the mic for questions about this stuff. Here he comes. Hold on one second. Here he comes. Yep. So mindset, so what are all of those skills? Empathy, sympathy, right? This, what we would call attunement. Okay, so you can think of empathy as feeling with. And now I can, when Sarah McLachlan goes off on and starts singing about the dogs, I have empathy for the dogs, right? But like, I'm over here and there's nothing I can do, right? Sympathy is like seeing pain and it moving you, but attunement is that ability to actually like match affect. So like when my 6-year-old runs into the kitchen after making what he thinks is a Picasso level art, right? And he's like, look at what I did. And I go, that's nice. That's not attuned, right? But knowing that, like being able to connect to his inner world and go, that's awesome, buddy. How'd you do that? Right? That's attunement. And that happens on the negative end of affect. It also happens on the positive end of affect. Yep, good question.
Come on.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to the hope bucket. We're going to fill it. We're going to fill the hope bucket. I think Vanita would agree that if I were going to say the key indicator and the key hope is a stronger, wiser, mature adult in their life who can practice mindsight for them. That when that's present, we create anti-fragility. Is the way perfectly smooth, right? Are the hills made low and the valleys filled in? No, it's still hard, but you're not alone, and that's the key. And the problem is that people who can't practice mindsight also don't really receive it very well, and so then they're alone, and that leads to a lot more anxiety.
There's a question over here about just, and it may be coming, but tools for how we can help our kids who are maybe experiencing that lack of mindsight.
Good. See, I like to create a big problem and get people worked up, and then I try to bring them some solutions. So thank you. Yep. Okay. I'm not done working you up. All right. So how do the top causes of death differ by age and state? Okay, so like look over on the left-hand column, 2001, 2002, okay? And then over on the right-hand column, 2020, 2021. Okay, it's really hard to see, but you got a very good projector. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom in, right? So the left-hand column, 2001, 2002, 20, 21 on the other side, okay? These are the people 18 to 44. So these are the people who have been teenagers for the last 20 years, give or take. Okay, so it's that cohort, that generation. On the left-hand side, what do you see in Nebraska as the leading cause of death? Transportation accident. What do you see as the leading cause of death? On the right-hand side, 2020, 21. Suicide. And you'll notice as you kind of move east, you get the purple. So what are we seeing? We're seeing negative coping. We're seeing a rise in negative coping. This is another really great book if you want to understand the differences in the generations. This is the best one on all this data. And I'm just going to present some data from her that I think are helpful. Suicide rates, 10 to 14-year-olds, stable from 1982 to 2010. And then, since 2010, boys are up 91%, girls are up 167%. Depressive symptoms, 8th, 10th, 12th graders. I can't do anything right. My life is not useful. I don't enjoy life. This has been given to high school students across the country since 1991. What do you see? What years do you see the difference? What do you see? 2012, 13, 14. What happened then? Every teen got a smartphone that had, and don't underestimate this. Do you remember the first smartphones? Where was the camera on the first smartphones? Facing that way. 10, 11, 12, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter 2.0, where it wasn't just about like posting your life and connecting with people. You had like buttons, and you had retweeting, and all of the rest comes online then. And you have a self-facing camera all of a sudden. 2012, 13, 14. Percentage of teens who had at least one major depressive episode, 2004 to 2000, so from 2004, and then we go to 2023. Girls, 13%, up to 29%, right? So we're up 145%. So we're talking about 29% of our teen girls have had a major depressive episode in the last year. That's an astronomical number. Boys, now, relatively speaking, they've had a greater increase, still less percentage of the population. Now, these are the percent increase among college students since 2010 on these disorders. Anxiety disorders up 134%, depression up 106%, ADHD up 72%, anorexia up 100%, scary, schizophrenia 67% increase. Emergency room visits. So one of the problems is self-report data is kind of hard because a lot can influence self-report stuff, but you'll notice that a lot of these don't have anything to do with self-report, it's just raw numbers. So emergency room visits for self-harm from 2004 to 2020, girls up 188%, boys up 48%. Now, somebody's going to say, yeah, Justin, COVID happened, and that made a huge difference. And yes, it did make a huge difference, but I'd return you back to the graph. It's just an acceleration of a trend that was already present, for sure. There are people who will say, no, it was the economic crisis of 2008. I won't even defend that one. Okay, now what do you see? For educators, these are the global aptitude scores in these domains. So I have teachers come up and tell me, something's going on. And it's not just like the raw numbers, I don't know, it feels like the 10th graders are like the 7th graders were when I started teaching. And that's accurate. Okay, now, in this book, Generations, these are the key indicators as opposed to the key indicators for previous generations. This is how Gen Z primarily defines themselves. So when it comes to gender fluidity, they self-report more lesbian, gay, and definitely more bisexual. They are actually less sexually active in person. Far fewer sexual partners than millennials, and then less than half the sexual partners of Gen Xers. They're growing up slowly, so this is interesting. Moment of first sexual exposure between 8 and 10, particularly for boys, meaning the first time they're exposed to explicitly sexual material. Okay, what's the age of marriage and first child? Late 20s, pushing into the 30s. So we have a 14-year-old in the 70s who saw Playboy was married by 20, 21. And now we have kids exposed to pornography and sexual material at 8, not getting married until their 30s. So then they come in for marriage therapy, and there's an enormous amount of remedial growing up that needs to take place. Because they've been single most of their life, all of their formative life, and then what do they lack often? Mindsight. I don't know about you, but that's the single most important thing for marriage and parenting. You have to have that to be able to care and love for somebody else. So they're growing up much slowly, and they're delaying adulthood. And this key word is maybe. Later, marriage and children, maybe later. There isn't a significant desire for that. They restrict speech. Their belief about speech is that it's violence. And so that generation really is very sensitive to speech and thinks that speech can be violent. And I guarantee you that if that certain members of that population were in this room, they'd feel very justified not letting me speak. Interest in physical and emotional safety. So what were the Xers interested in? Were they interested in safety or adventure? What didn't the Xers actually have very much of growing up? Safety. Interesting. There's a high level of racial conscientiousness and consciousness. They score much higher in the dissatisfaction with life and depressed. They're definitely almost exclusively online in their communication. They're less likely to be physically healthy. There's some extreme pessimism, perceived discrimination, and external locus of control. Okay, so that goes back to the speech thing. And they are more likely to be politically polarized and refer to themselves as activist, an activist population. So when I was reading this book, I too was like, this is really sad. And it kind of got me like worried. But I think we have some things that we can do. Okay, this is another piece, particularly in the sexual realm. They're having less sex, way more porn, less marriage, fewer babies, and more activism around sexual issues. Is this in keeping with just your anecdotal surveying of the land? Okay. Percentage identifying as transgender by age group. I'll let you look at that for a second. Percent of U.S. adults identifying as transgender by sex assigned at birth. So what's the issue? Our children are perpetually elsewhere. They're not embodied. They don't go outside. I think going outside would be helpful. Okay? And I think of them as interrupted individuals. So smartphones in a high school English class. Let's just, for example. How many notifications in a 60-minute period do you think the average high school student gets? 15. Okay? Higher or lower 15, raise your hand. Higher. Raise your hand if you think it's lower. Okay? Raise your hand if you think it's higher than 50, 50. How many higher than 75? Higher than 100? Higher than 200? It's higher than 200. They're interrupted. So what do I think the problems are? ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, smartphones, social media, expressive individualism, achievement culture versus development culture. Okay, we're starting to move toward solutions, okay? So what are adverse childhood experiences? Experiences that undermine a child's sense of safety, stability, and/or attachment security. Violence, abuse, neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, parental caregiver instability or insensitivity due to substance abuse, mental illness, incarceration, relational discord, financial insecurity, residential upheaval, etc. And then there's a category of other trauma. So ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, create pain, which requires coping. So we did have a pretty awful event of a pandemic, and it was particularly awful for children who had their entire sense of normalcy disrupted. Okay? So that leads to a lot of the coping that we're seeing. ACEs create pain, which requires coping. And you can think of kind of the two types: acute, like losing a parent in a car accident, something along those lines that's just catastrophic and big and in a moment that has long consequences, or you can think of chronic ones, like seeing dad stumbling around the front yard, drunk, chronically, or seeing violence in your home chronically, okay? These are chronic adverse childhood experiences. We don't want those. So then we said smartphones, social media. Is this the average minute on social media that people under or over 18 have? Over. How much bigger do you think under 18 is? 444 minutes a day on social media is the average. Now, I took the very, very conservative number. I took the very conservative number. So how much of a person's life is that? When you start, how many hours, how many days, how many years? That this is the medium for the experiencing of others, the digital medium. These are the 3 top ones at the time of the creation of this presentation. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. What do all of those have? Are they long form, deep, in-depth, critical thinking videos? No, that's what China shows their kids. What do we have? No more than a minute, usually 10 to 15 seconds. Designed to do what? These videos are designed to slip right past the front part of our brain, where our will, our volition, our virtue, anything that we strive for, that comes from up here in our executive functioning. These engineers are brilliant at creating mediums that sneak right past that part of the brain and speak to things that are much more primal, like sex, like attraction, like arousal, like anger and frustration, okay? Emotional priming behind the front part of our brain. So I'm just going to show you the risk factors again. So with social media in particular, FOMO and compulsive checking. More importantly, the identity, preferences, norms, values, character, construction. So as parents in this room, I know, who do you want to be forming your children's character, identity? You want the person work of Jesus Christ to be doing that. You want to be doing that. You want trusted others to be doing that. To the tune of 444 minutes a day, other people are doing that. Most of whom you have no idea, and I can guarantee it's not positive formation in their baptismal identity. Directed attention versus captivated attention. So I'm going to get the question later, what about video games? Okay? There's a fundamental difference between how the brain works when it's directing attention at something and trying to solve problems. That produces growth. Captivated attention produces soothing. Okay? So the question is it directed attention or is it captivated attention? Video games that require problem-solving, directed attention stuff can be fine, as long as it's balanced with going outside. Okay? The captivated attention, like garbage, that's how I'm gonna, everybody, how do you feel after binge watching Netflix all day and into the night? How do you feel? Not great. That's captivated attention hangover. Then how much harder is it to direct your attention at something challenging? Much harder. That's what's happening. So I want to create a distinction too. I think you had somebody come in and talk about the acute trauma that takes place over social media, bullying, like, sexting and predators and the like. So I'm not going to go down that path. But the chronic consequences are the ones that I think are the most damaging. So what is it that is coming through these portals? Okay? What is it that is actually being delivered? This includes everything from porn to the genius 21-year-old activist who's got the world figured out and is going to tell your daughter about it. Okay? What is it that is actually being delivered? It's the expressive individualism. Expressive individualism. Just be you, find the truth within, have it your way. Truth is subjective. Identity is defined by an individual's psychological core, meaning what do I experience? That is truth on the planet. And it's not only truth for me, but it is the formative and normative truth for everybody else. This is why it's so bankrupt of a philosophy. And if you challenge it at all, that is oppression. You are oppressing me if you have a different opinion and dare to share it. Which means I have to be an activist then because you're an oppressor. It becomes quite political in nature. So the self refers to an individual's experience, how an individual experiences his or her identity, making the self the chief arbiter of reality. What do we call those people? And for all the teenagers in this room, I love you. I do. I care about you. What do you call that? You call that me at 15. The adolescent brain is about the self. And it's kind of functional and important because the self has to develop a bunch. But what's the goal then? That they would receive messaging that would teach them mind sight so that they recognize that they're not the center of the universe. I can't tell you how many times my dad, some of you know, Justin, you're not the center of the universe. As it turns out, right? I think I've said it to my kids. Maybe you've said it to yours, okay? This is pushing back against this. Just one thing from Twangie's book, which I think is really interesting. Use of individualistic phrases in American books from 1950 to 2019. How about that? Individualism is our chief value, and I'm telling you right now, that is what is being piped in through this little portal in your hand and in the hand of your children. Achievement culture, excessive pressure to achieve, achievement as the only path to mattering. So along with expressive individualism, I think, especially among people who live like we live here in this area, achievement is the only path to mattering. This happens in academics, sports, music, social media. So this sets up achievement and success versus development. We think of achievement and success doesn't matter, development doesn't matter, but achievement and success matters. So it creates results over relationship and outcome over process. And I don't want to be part of systems that are willing to do whatever it takes to get to an outcome, but don't pay attention to the process that gets them there. I don't want to be part of systems that only care about results and not relationships. Sadly, a lot of our families run like this. And so then, what is one of the things that is the best indicator of this? Time allocation and unstructured play. The development of our children are at stake. I know this in April. I was telling Aaron about it. It's like April is the month where it's like, okay, everybody, divide and conquer. I'll see you in May. And I feel guilty about it because time allocation for unstructured play. So last night, had some time, grabbed the kids, we went out to the acreage, and they're like, what are we going to do? And I was like, I don't care. No, what should we do? It's like, I don't care. Can we watch TV in the camp? No. Go away. So what did they do? They grabbed hammers, hatchets, nails, and they ran off to the woods and tried to build a fort, okay? I think that's like the development that does in a child's brain is astronomically more incarnational and better than the development that takes place when the body doesn't move, when we have a disembodied consciousness in the digisphere someplace. So what are the solutions? For ACEs, security, security, security. Get your relational house in order. And if it's not in order, that's okay. It happens. I know some people who are willing to help you get it in order. And they're really good people. And they like to sit down and help people with this. Okay? So our children's lives are kind of important, and they need healthy relationships around them. Tech and social media. I'm going to have a few more slides on this, but the main principles, really, really non-negotiable boundaries. Some people argue, and I've heard therapists and psychologists argue about negotiating boundaries. I don't think that that's healthy, honestly, as long as you're paying for the phone. Boundaries, late exposure, absolutely critical. The later the exposure, the better. Unstructured play, in-person social interaction. Facilitating in-person social interaction. So my son's on a baseball team, and I asked him, like, how's the bus ride to the game? You just experienced the bus ride to the game. In-person social interaction. I mean, we would get in trouble for being too rowdy, right? You remember that, Aaron? Okay. Expressive individualism, okay, how we push back against that. Baptismal identity. So, forgive me if you've heard this story, but I think it's critical. Grew up in Millington, Michigan, town of 1,100, church of 1,700, and my dad was the pastor. Okay? So, I couldn't go anywhere in that town without somebody. It was in Saginaw Valley, Michigan, where there are more Lutherans than people. So, no matter where I went, there goes the pastor's kid. So, Dad was dropping us off at a football game, and I don't want to say he was paranoid about it, but he definitely didn't like it if I reflected really poorly on the family, which I appreciate now. But I was getting out of the car, and he reaches over and he grabs my hand or my arm as I'm trying to sprint out while the car's still moving, I think. And he says, Justin, don't get in any fights. Don't steal anything. Don't be bullying anybody. Don't create the general mayhem that you are wont to do. Be good. No, he doesn't say any of those things. He didn't say any of those things. He said, Justin, remember who and whose you are. Remember who and whose you are. Now, is that law or is that gospel? It's both. It's both. In that moment, it was law. Right? In that moment, it's law. But in a moment after I did something stupid and was punished, and then there's reconciliation, and just remember who and whose you are. You're God's and you're mine, and I love you. That's what's going to push back against expressive individualism, because we aren't meant to be islands. We're meant to be in relationship with one another. I equate youth sports culture with achievement culture, around here anyway. Promote process and development over outcome. In your home, talk to your coaches about this. Promote process and development over outcome. Mattering, people, there's a route. And we know, amazing athletes who didn't feel like they could matter until they won the Masters or until they won an NBA championship, okay? There's books about this. And they didn't feel like they mattered until they would do that. So how how was the process of their life when you watch the documentary? Not great. Now, maybe you have the next Masters winner in your home. I don't know. Odds would say not. So can we focus on mattering in our baptismal identity, animating us toward achievement, right? Versus the fear, scarcity, worry, needing to do these things to matter. That's what's creating a ton of achievement-related anxiety, academics, sports, and ironically, social media, right? How many followers do you have? I just had a mom come up to me and tell me, I don't like anything you have to say. My son has over so many followers on YouTube, and people really like him. And it's great. What happens when he gets really awkward when he's 19 and the followers start going away? Does he matter then? Smartphones, no screens in the B's. Bedroom, bathroom, basement. Basement means anywhere you can be alone with it. No screens in the B's. The smartphone seems to just break all the rules. It's a phone. I can take it to my bedroom and charge it next to my head at night. No, you cannot. Not in my home. Set app time limits. The cool thing about smartphones is they're really smart, and you can set limits. And you can keep the password. And then they're just there. They're automatic. It's pretty neat. Charge it in a different room. Do not give, and this is the stuff that I think maybe you went over in a previous session, but I'll do it again. Do not give out personal information. Make sure your kids know these things. Never meet anyone you only know online without an adult. If you're going to buy something, or there's a lot of predators and groomers. We are overprotecting our children in the physical realm, and we're underprotecting them in the digital realm. Tech fast every week, so spend a day away from it every week, spend a weekend away from it every month, and spend a week away from it every year. Highly recommend this for resetting the neurophysiology around smartphone usage. And then accountability software restrictions, there's a lot of those. If you have questions about that, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Go outside and do something with your body. We're made of outside. Our bodies are made of the stuff that's out there. So when we're with it, our bodies respond better. It's just fundamentally true. So what am I seeing in parents? Self-fulfilling prophecy, fear of setting limits, catastrophizing. I tried to take it away and my child blew up at me. I'm afraid to set this limit because it could mean that my friend won't have any my child won't have any friends at school. This is the molehill that I see turned into mountains all the time. So I'm seeing this among parents too. And then finally, the last one, vicarious living. It's that they kind of are pretty excited about seeing how much, your tweet got retweeted this many times. I don't think that people tweet anymore, so what do? Your Snapchat got Snapchatted. Come on, you guys back there rolling your eyes at me. I like it. TikToking, how many views or whatever? Uploads, they don't do that anymore either. Okay. So what am I seeing in parents? Overprotection in the physical world. Drones. Parents who just drone around and watch everything all the time, right? They're just always watching. Well, where's he at? And they're following him on Life 360, and they don't live their own life, and they're just constantly worried. Okay, helicopters. Those are drones that swoop down and pick up, right? So not only are they watching, but they're really quick to intervene and snatch. And then the snowplow, right, is the parent out front trying to make sure that every obstacle is removed. Does this make for anti-fragile humans? No, it does not. So we're overprotecting them in the physical world with little to no protection in the digital world. We just hand them this little portal that the entire universe can like pipe crap to them, and we just walk away. But no, I can't let you walk 3 blocks to school because a predator might pick you up. That's not happening hardly ever anymore. What's happening is that they're getting contacted through social media and the internet and getting groomed, and then the children are choosing to go. That's what's happening. Like the creeper van isn't a thing as much anymore, statistically speaking. So what parents can do: no smartphones until high school. Period. End of sentence. I'm just waiting for stuff to start flying from different tables. No social media until 16. And somebody's asking me, why 16? I was like, well, if I hand my son the keys to a 2,000, 4,000 pound machine that can kill people, I feel like I can trust them with a smartphone, with social media and communication. What goes in early goes in deep. This is the principle. Play the long game. Every year of delay makes a big difference. Every year of delay makes a big difference. Advocate strongly for a phone-free school for learning purposes. I'm still waiting for Lincoln Lutheran to get mad at me, but I write them checks every month, it's a joke. Facilitate real social interaction with children of like-minded parents. So in Seward, where my kids are running around, Dietrich, our 12-year-old, Kat's got her like little group of parents, and there's these boys, and they're like good old-fashioned bicycle gang, and they ride all over Seward, and they go down to Plum Creek and build bridges, and they, have their Orby wars, and they do this stuff because they want to like unstructured, self-governed. That's really, really important for social development. So find those people and make that stuff happen this summer. Make that stuff happen. Practice mindsight with your kids. Check in. Like a full-on, like incarnated interaction, conversation. It's a thing that we humans used to do, and it's really good. It's called the talking cure. So you ask about the sensations, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, relationships. These are just a short list, right, of topics, and you check in with them. And then as things emerge for your child, you notice what's going on for them, and then you give them language that they probably don't have for understanding what's going on. And when you practice mindsight for them, they end up learning more about what's going on for themselves, which then in turn teaches them to do that for others. And it's called reflective dialogue, and humans have been doing this for a very, very long time, and it is the best tool for developing mindsight. Reflective dialogue. So if somebody said, like, what's the number one parenting tool that I need to have in my tool belt, I would say reflective dialogue. Having reflective conversation, because that person across from you, your child, is not you. It's a distinct person, a different person. And they're going to be on their own developmental trajectory with their own thoughts, feelings, needs, desires, all of these things that are going to be super complicated. And then there's going to come this time when you have no say in what they do with them. And that's terrifying for me as a parent. So what I want to do is, while I have them, be part of their insight into what's going on for them, so they can learn to regulate and manage it. Because there comes this point at which we don't get to regulate them, right? We want them to be able to regulate themselves for the sake of another. And that's really, really, really critical. So we notice and we name what's going on. What else to do? Take care of yourself. You make the weather in your home. Get help if you need it. Check in accountability with other like-minded parents. And then finally, engage in the life liturgies that bear good fruit. The life liturgies, the spiritual disciplines that bear good fruit. Why? Because your children are watching. Your children are watching, and you want to form them in those. Okay. I left plenty of time for questions, Aaron. That's a complicated problem, but the first thing that you told me I've heard a lot is that a lot of young people recognize the role that their technology is playing in their life, and they recognize the consequences, and they're asking for help. And I think that that's really good. I think also the third spaces change, and there are these transitional periods. So like when your life is being subsidized by somebody else, called a parent, okay? And like they're underwriting your life, they have more say in what those third spaces are going to be. And like there's a generational difference, a really significant one, where lots of parents used to like actually, Jim Gaffigan has a joke, okay, and it's a really good joke. I love it. He says, I have more pictures of my kids than my dad ever looked at me. So like, I just basically had to yell something as I ran out the house in Lincoln, Nebraska, okay? In this town, I had to yell something at my mom, like, Mom, I'm gonna go ride my bike. No cell phone, no nothing. You just hop on your bike and then you ride someplace. And then if you ended up at somebody else's house, you'd call over to the house and say, Mom, I'm at Zach's house. Okay, and these houses and these parks and these playgrounds and Gateway Mall and Goodyear Fitness Center and all of these places were the places where other human beings like saw other human beings. And the generational shift to like, I don't need to do that because I think like you, there's a lot of people coming to figure out how disenfranchising that is. And so then it gets complicated about where do you go? Like, do you go to the bar? You know, you're 21, you go to the bar. Well, there's limits to the utility of that, for sure. Do you go to church? Does church have an open door policy? Are there mechanisms in places? I don't have an answer to that always, but I think that like-minded, so I said activist in a bad way, but I think activist can also be really useful. So like you can be an activist for finding spaces for like-minded people to come together and have real interaction, for sure. So I would say it's the inverse. So one of the things we do in our house, you know, is okay, we have a kind of a system for earning screen time, right? So then, like, yeah, it's a reward rather than a steady state. So, like, even Kaiser is 16, has his own phone. Like, there's more freedom for him, you know, but he doesn't have the freedom to, like, come into the house while everybody else is cooking dinner and lay down on the couch and start playing a video game on his phone while everybody else is setting the table and getting things, you know what I mean? It's not that kind of freedom. So there's like an earning. It's actually more important that like we have clear responses for the protest of its absence. So if I walk into the living room and the living room's a complete mess and breakfast is still like bowls are all over the table and there's a mess in the kitchen and it's Saturday morning and Dad slept in, which happens occasionally. And I come down and they're watching TV. I don't mind that, and we'll let it play. And then I'll be like, time to turn the TV off and get things cleaned up. And I can tell you, definitely the three older ones, and Walter's getting hip to it too, that if they protest it turning off, then there's a consequence. And the consequence is its absence until you can demonstrate to me that it isn't a drug. Because the same people do that when you take their alcohol away from them, when you take their cigarettes away from them. And so we're working that process of managing the dissatisfaction inside. So like with a 9-year-old, my favorite, Joy. So I walk into the kitchen and I say, Joy, you're my favorite, and daughter, and and the boys are getting hip to it, I think, now. But with her, it's hard for me to like set limits, I'll be honest. And so Kat has made it really clear to me that I have to set limits. And my limits with her are much more of a reflective dialogue. And so I've been convicted to have more reflective dialogue with my sons too. Because with my sons, it's much more like, yeah, I know you don't want to get up and do this, but you're going to get up and do this. And with Joy, I sit down and I have a reflective dialogue. Like, yeah, Netflix is more fun. I know, it's more fun than cleaning, but we have to turn it off. And you know that feeling inside, we want to learn to regulate that. I have that conversation with my daughter, but my sons, it's like, let's go. And I'm convicted about that. So I think it's about dealing with the protest, if that makes sense. How do you manage the protest and help them learn to manage it themselves? So we have I've actually given this some thought. We are such multisensory beings that we generally will have a pretty dominant sense in any given moment. And our ears are kind of neat that they really connect to a cognitive processing. And so there, again, are kind of two types of attention being paid to audible information. One is directing the attention, and when it's hard, like on a Sunday afternoon after lunch and somebody's talking about psychological stuff, you have to direct your attention at it. And you have to pay close attention for the really dry joke and dry humor. Then there's like the captivated attention, okay? Now, I don't begrudge somebody some captivated attention time. So my older son, Kaiser, he'll have his headphones in listening to music. My second son, Dietrich, who's like got a grinding intellect, like he'll just needle things and grind it. Like he's listening to podcasts, and some of which are about chess, you know? And so you kind of have like these. I want to facilitate growth and learning, and I think like that medium is fine. Then there is like manners. It's like this thing that we forgot as a society, like what are manners? So we as a society have done a really good job developing humans physically. We have plenty of resources to get people to physical maturity. We do a fairly good job getting people to academic maturity still because we have a lot of inertia, you know, from generations and generations of wanting people to grow academically. I would say to a lesser degree, we still have some inertia, but we're doing a less good job forming people socially, for sure. And then we're derelict emotionally and spiritually, for sure. And so I think, you know, what is the phrase? Don't let your children do anything that makes you not like them. So why? Because if it makes you not like them, it's probably going to make a lot of people around them in their lives not like them, and that will create shame and a self-fulfilling prophecy of really bad stuff. Do you know what I mean? So if I'm walking up and I'm like walking into the same room as my son, who's 16, and he's got his headphones on, and he like completely ignores me, I don't have such an ego that I need him to acknowledge my existence. But like if I'm talking to him and he's like, no. Like, I'm a human being, you're a human being, we're gonna have a conversation, then you can put your headphones back on. So like push pause. We're gonna talk about what's gonna happen, and then we'll come apart. So it's like, it's hard work, I think, to be mindful of what like manners are and how we would like honor each other's existence, basically. So if I walk in and I know that I just have to push pause on the button if I walk in and my 4 kids are watching TV. It's like, I can't tell them something because they're not plugged in. So I think developing that social connection through good old-fashioned manners. Please, thank you. Calling their friend's dad Pastor Hutton. What's up, dog? We're not doing that. Yeah.
You mentioned how important reflective dialogue is. Could you just give an example of what that would look like?
Yeah, probably. You want to come model it, Aaron? Yeah. Yeah. Come on.
What's the topic? Am I listening to you? So Justin, on my bucket list, I want to go to Hawaii. I have wanted to go to Hawaii for some time. Specifically, I want to go to Hawaii with my wife.
You're talking to
okay?
me, dude. Not all them.
Hold on a minute. What'd you say?
Yeah, thanks. So you want to go to Hawaii, huh? What is it about Hawaii that you like?
Oh, man. I love travel. I love exploration. I want to go different places around the world. That's just one of those areas out in the Pacific. Personally, I want to see some of the World War II hitting, like Honolulu. There's a thing called Pearl Harbor. Maybe you've heard about it before.
Yeah, what is it about Pearl Harbor that gets you excited?
Man, I think there's an eerie sense to it. It's just an important part of the history of our country diving into a major war. I think it's fascinating because I don't know where else on planet Earth you can go see a ship that's remained sunken as a tomb.
Well, I think it'd be really exciting. And you mentioned, I think it was yesterday or the day before, though, that you're a little worried about flying.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when did that start?
When I married my wife.
Oh. Why is that?
I don't want to die.
Okay. Me either. So dying is kind of scary.
Well, yeah. When you watch movies like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and Snakes on a Plane, and all these other movies, and what's that guy that landed it in the Hudson or something?
Yeah.
And it's that's going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, maybe we'll be the sunken plane as a tomb.
I would tell you that statistically that's very uncommon, but I don't think that's going to do anything for your fear. What have you done traditionally to manage your fear?
Drink vodka.
Yeah, so we're going to want to work on something else, I think. What about deep breaths? Have you ever just taken deep breaths with your fear?
Just now.
Oh, you feel better. Good. So it's funny you bring this fear of death up. So my 12-year-old comes at nighttime because he's going through puberty. Thanks, Aaron. His body is super distressed. And so because he's got this grinding intellect, he's trying to figure out why he's distressed. And then this image of death pops into his head, right? And so he'll come up to talk to me and be like, I'm thinking about death again, Dad. And we'll have a conversation that actually mirrors that. Yeah, the body doesn't want to die. Life is good. It's, and so normalizing is part of the reflective dialogue. But then also, when there's a rapport and a connection, then suggesting, what about taking some deep breaths? Or in the case of my son, I'll put my hand on his chest and be like, take some deep breaths and make my chest move. And the warmth from my hand and the grounding and connection with a parent soothes the central nervous system through reflective dialogue and physical contact. And the attention of a stronger, wiser, more mature person produces an at-peace central nervous system. So that's how I would follow that. I wasn't gonna, that'd be weird. So. Yeah, all right, okay. Yeah, I'm talking you down, Aaron. Yep. Thank you for your time. Oh, we got more? One more question. Okay, so if I had more time and we had a long weekend together, we would talk more about integration and what it looks like to integrate. So for example, Kaiser got a smartphone because he turned 16 in March and now he drives. And so he's got a smartphone. And what's really interesting is that he doesn't care. And that's his personality. So for him, I know it's he literally doesn't care that he's not on Snapchat. And some of his teachers are here, he cares that he doesn't have, that he misses certain inside jokes will hurt him, and so he'll want to like be part of it, and then he doesn't get it, so then the guys don't maybe like circle him in on it, and because he wasn't on the Snapchat. And I was like, well, you know, I think Snapchat is a Luciferian tool, but if you want it, we could talk about what boundaries we want to use on it. So it's not like I'm drawing like hard lines on things like that, but it's about like the development of accountability over time. And the nature, character, and quality of a relationship is what I'm trying to leverage for that development, rather than really like hard boundaries. Now, the smartphone boundary is like hard in terms of I just don't think it's necessary, number one. I don't think it's gonna form your brain very well. So no smartphones till high school, no social media till you're 16. Why? Because the 14-year-old brain, particularly of females, is like really social and really cares about external locuses of control. That's a less of a thing for boys as they mature, but it's still an issue. But for females in particular, that's what would prompt like a 14-year-old girl to like try to deceive a parent, is that they're transitioning their attachment from a parent to a peer group, ideally then to a partner. And we as parents have to facilitate that, like trying on of their security in those contexts. But we also need to be really mindful about what messaging is going on in that context. So I want to say we can thread the needle on these things, yeah. But that would take a longer time. Yeah. See, we're out of time.
We're out of time. Thank you so much, Justin. Can we thank Justin one more time? Also, just wanted to thank Kristen DeVito, the rest of the Family Ministries team, the Seaman family who are here to help us make this kind of thing happen. So we're grateful for all of you. Thank you all for being here. Keep your ears tuned to what we might be doing for Second Sundays for Parents in the next year to come. We're following the school year, so we'll take the summer off for Second Sundays for Parents, and then beginning in the fall, we'll see what that looks like and make sure you're all aware. Thank you all for being here. If we could close with a word of prayer, then we'll let you all go. God, praise and thank you for a time where we can gather as parents who care about our young people. We're so grateful for the voices who have been able to come and speak with us to help us navigate some of these hard things, and we know that your Spirit comes with us as we do so. Be with us as we go and direct our steps. It's in your name we pray. Amen.